I am delighted to have Jenica Rogers with us as the Carl 2012 conference keynote speaker. I love your line, Jenica, libraries like farmers have never had a good year. I thought, wow, yeah, they still grow food and we eat, so it's all good. We have to acknowledge that and move forward. Anyway, so Jenica's talk this morning is entitled Saying Yes, Building Innovative Libraries by Killing Fear and Getting the Job Done. Acknowledging but letting go of fear, of doing it all, doing it right, and doing it carefully. Jenica will share strategies and approaches to management and leadership changes that will help us to move our libraries forward. Jenica Rogers is Director of Libraries for the Crum and Crane Libraries at the State University of New York at Potsdam, coming from a background in cataloging, collection development, and staff training. Her responsibilities include short-term and strategic planning, fiscal management, fundraising, and donor development. Jenica's current professional interests include trying to think strategically about the next 5 years, advocating for swift but rational implementation of emerging technologies and academic libraries, breaking the bad patterns of ostrich-style library management, and I have to pause for that because that brings such a wonderful visual to me, Yeah, okay. Just had to stop and, because every time, we get stuck sometimes. So every time I kind of get stuck and think, oh my gosh, I can't go to work, I'm going to think of ostrich-style library management, and that's going to pull me out of my doldrums, yes. And her professional interests also include informing, mentoring, and supporting new library professionals as they hit the real world, face first and at full speed. In 2009, she received a SUNY Potsdam President's Award for Excellence in Professional Service and was nominated one of Library Journal's Movers and Shakers for 2009. Please help me give a warm California welcome to Jenica Rogers.
Good morning. How am I on the microphone? Sound good? All right. I would like to first off thank you all for what was a lovely welcome. That was perhaps the most charming welcome I've ever gotten somewhere. And also for inviting me here today, because not only do I have the chance to speak to a group of people who, geographically speaking, I'm unlikely to ever get to interact with, so this is a lovely opportunity for me. I'm like literally, I don't think you can get much further from here than my home and still be in the United States. But also, I got a chance to see a panda from about 10 feet away yesterday, so thank you for that. And so, for any of you who might be thinking about taking notes and trying to record all the things that I may reference as I go forward, you don't need to. All of my images that I used are credited, and all of the resources that I make reference to are linked on my blog. It's at the top of the page right now if you go to attemptingelegance.com, and that is the direct link if you want to go straight to that post. I hope that saves you a little effort. So, there's no point in not starting. So hi. I'm Jenica. I am, as noted, the Director of Libraries for the State University of New York at Potsdam. Far upstate New York. We're closer to Canada than just about anything. My nearest international airport is the capital of Canada. And I've been working in libraries since I was 16. Which, when I wrote that down, I realized that makes this my 20th year in libraries, which is slightly intimidating. And I've done everything except the ILs, information literacy and ILL. I had the beginning of my time in libraries in circ and shelving and student worker training and management, and then moved on to tech services when I got my degree, where I did acquisitions, serials, bindery cataloging. Then I did a stint as a trainer for a consortium, and then I moved into collection development. And then from there, when I was 33, I decided that the worst thing that they could do to me was say no when I applied for my boss's job. And they said yes. So I've spent my 3 years in administration focusing on transparency and on responsiveness. And I am, to put it bluntly, very, very tired of the status quo in libraries. I am tired of our focus on being quiet, on being fearful, and on never, ever, ever offending anyone. Oh, good. This is going to go very well if you feel that way. So I'll tell you that at ALA in New Orleans this past summer, I taught a workshop about management and leadership with my friend Colleen Harris from the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. And immediately thereafter, the Llama Programming Committee met to plan Anaheim. And Colleen was told that I can't present for Llama anymore because I said, "Don't be an asshole," during one of the presentations. And it wasn't an admonishment, it wasn't a response to someone's behavior, it was like advice, right? Like, don't be an asshole. So I've warned you now. You're probably pretty clear that I'm rarely formal and I'm not very stodgy. So if that was what you were hoping for, I apologize. So from here on out, I'm pretty much just gonna promise not to swear unless it's really worth it. And having set your expectations appropriately, I will begin. So, slide 1. You're totally surprised to see this on the screen, right? Nobody's ever told you this. You're wondering why no one's mentioned it to you before. But bear with me, because I'm going to lay some groundwork before I dive into some other things. Libraries are changing. We kind of know that. But I think of it as a metamorphosis. Because I think that we are the same at our core right now. We are still standing with users on one side and information on the other, and we're doing everything we can to bridge that gap in between, because that's the place where investigation and synthesis and learning happen, and that's what we have always been trying to support. So that in-between is still there, and it's the same there, it's just a different there. I mean, if you can say those two things in the same sentence, they're true. It's the same thing we've always done, it's just very different. And so the thing that I suspect that a bunch of you thought when I flipped to the slide is that really we all know this. Those are truths. They are now self-evident. We've been talking about this since the 90s. It's 2012, for God's sake. So you're right. We have been talking about it for ages. My entire professional career in graduate education, in fact, and we're still talking about it. And on one level, I think that's totally okay, because it's true. Libraries are changing. The thing that I think that needs to be a more practical part of the conversation is this. Number 1, libraries in our modern era have always been changing. My long-term cataloging colleagues back home, some of them have been in our library for more than 30 years. And they'll tell you great horror stories about all the things that they've done and the dramatic changes that their job has had over the last 30 years. And for the large part, most of those weren't in the last 10, or even in the last 15. So this notion that we are changing so dramatically right now, it's true, but it's not the whole truth. Libraries have always been changing in any of our memories. So, number 2, we have to stop using "stuff is changing and we can't really predict our future" as an excuse for why we can't do anything. Because, see, number 1, things have always been and likely always will be changing, so it's a really poor excuse for standing still and staring at the world in befuddlement. This is not different. This is our world, and welcome to it. But number 3, I think that the library metamorphosis in the last decade has had some distinct, measurable, and dramatic effects on what we do. And I think that while we haven't reached stasis, and we may never reach stasis for what a library is ever again, we can now say that we see some big trends, and that we can make some choices about how to respond to those, even as we anticipate what comes next. So I was going to summarize some of what those big trends are, but smarter people than I am have done this research, and so I'm going to quote them instead. The advisory board company produced a report from their University Leadership Council, which it's largely aimed, I believe, at provosts and higher academic administrators. It's called Redefining the Academic Library, Managing the Migration to Digital Information Services. There's a 100-page report, a 50-slide presentation highlighting it in a visual form, and an 8-page executive summary that is extremely usable. And this is the kind of report that you can share not only with librarians, but with library staff and faculty and its actual intended audience, senior administration. And it says some very useful things. The most valuable part in my eyes is the first part, the summary, and actually the first part of the summary, the very first page of the summary. They're top lessons of transformational change in libraries. So that's the list I'm going to quote you here because they did a better job than I possibly could. So, collection size is rapidly losing importance. Even the wealthiest academic libraries are abandoning the collection arms race, I think it's a great phrase, as the value of physical resources declines. Increasingly, libraries must adapt to a world in which providing access to, rather than ownership of, scholarly resources is their primary role. Libraries can no longer demonstrate their educational and scholarly impact via traditional input measures, such as the number of volumes and serial titles held, expenditure on monographs and staff, gate count, reference requests. New measures of success still under development will emphasize impact on student learning outcomes, retention and graduation rates, faculty research productivity, and teaching support. Subscriptions to scholarly journals and electronic databases have steadily risen as a share of library budgets at what many believe is an unsustainable rate, particularly in an era of tightened budgets. With the rise of companies like Google and Amazon, as well as nonprofits like Wikipedia and HathiTrust, users now meet most of their information needs through sources outside of the library. The collections of articles, monographs, and ebooks made available through these organizations dwarf library collections in size and scope. Very few students and a decreasing number of faculty start research in the library building or via the library website. And finally, the modern library is caught between its historical role in managing print materials and new demand for digital resources and services, and it cannot afford to invest indefinitely in both. So I suspect a lot of that sounds familiar to a lot of you. I mean, that's the world I live in. I suspect it's the world you live in as well. The challenge that I see is that our stakeholder expectations are in totally different places from our experiences and the reality that we know. We're busily turning into a butterfly, and our faculty think we made a damn fine caterpillar. They don't really understand why we might want to be a butterfly. Who needs butterflies? So another piece of the groundwork here, the framework, is that the Ithaca S&R, the strategy and research arm of the organization behind JSTOR, does annual research reports on topics of interest to libraries, looking at digitization, the information economy, attitudes, perceptions. Every 3 years, they do a faculty perception survey, and in 2009, they identified some trends I think we need to pay attention to, particularly if they do a 2012 edition, which I suspect that they will, as they've done it every 3 years for the past decade. So one of the research questions that they asked faculty in that survey was to identify whether something was an important role for libraries or not, on a scale of not at all to very. And so faculty identified the following as a very important role for libraries. Research and teaching support, 60%. Those are pretty good numbers. We like more than half. We think more than half means we're gaining ground, getting some traction, moving forward. But gateway to information, 60%? Really? I mean, have you not used Google or watched a student do research recently? Didn't we just say and largely agree that very few students and a declining number of faculty start their research in the library? Why are we thinking we're a gateway? Well, we are not, but the faculty sure do. But then you keep going down the list. Archive of information, 71%. That's big, and it's a classic role of libraries. And so it shouldn't come as a surprise to us. This is something that our faculty, our most traditional stakeholder group, wants us to keep doing. And it's something that many of us also value. Okay, we can work with that. But the last one, 90% of faculty see us as buyers of information. I don't know about you guys, but I don't run a purchasing office. My job is not to hand over cash to make other people happy. that 90% who want us to be buyers of information, who see that as more important than the 60% who want us to support research and teaching, that's a challenge. I want more than 60% of our faculty to think that it's very important for libraries to be engaged in research and teaching support. I want that to be a higher number than the people who want us to archive things. Information literacy, we decided that was our future, and we staked the farm on it. And 60% is not a high enough number if we're looking for buy-in from our community on that. And that's certainly my small liberal arts college bias coming through. I'm not an archive. That is not my job, and I know that there are some of you out there for whom this is your job. And that's absolutely valid, but I think that we also need to acknowledge that it is not our only job. Buying and preserving information is not our future on its own any longer. So clearly, there's a contradiction between these expectations and the broadly accepted trends in information in libraries and our future. This stakeholder group wants very traditional services from libraries, and everybody else is pointing out that that's a legacy model. And so I suspect that none of you are surprised by what I've just said, but that's a problem. We're getting conflicting requests and demands, and they are seemingly mutually exclusive, and in large part, in libraries, I would say, we are just reacting to what is being thrown at us. I believe deeply that we are really, really good crisis managers, all of us. This is what librarians do. I mean, if you think about the things we claim are the core of what we do, often that statement is user services. It's reference, it's patron assistance. It's the kid who shows up at the desk crying because her paper's due in 6 hours and she needs at least a bibliography, even if she can't write the paper. And we help, and we succeed. And we help her to leave not crying anymore, feeling like maybe she didn't screw up as bad as she thought she did, and maybe she learned something and we feel good about that. We're crisis managers. Crisis managers don't plan very well. We provide miracles in the moments when they're most needed, and we love solving the problems that other people toss at us. It's what we do, but it's all reaction. It's not action. So that's like the equivalent of flailing around with damp wings when we suddenly realized we could fly if we tried, but last thing we knew, we were a caterpillar. And so add into that the fact that our two key stakeholder groups in academia, students and faculty, seem to want very different things from us. And if we're just reacting, what are we supposed to react to? The broader world, which is in a moral, economic, and practical crisis at the intersection of publishing, technology, and policy. Is that what we're supposed to be reacting to right now? Students, our largest and most rapidly evolving user group, and the needs that have been identified in that first report, is that what we're supposed to be reacting to? Or faculty, our most politically valuable and academically grounded allies and partners, whose opinions and expectations matter to us, but as assessed by Ithaca, are focused on a legacy model. Is that what we're supposed to be reacting to? We don't seem to know what we're supposed to be reacting to. And so I would argue that given no clear path for what we should be reacting to, we're reacting rather poorly, particularly from a leadership angle. And there's some, not just me standing up here saying that, I've got some evidence for that. Because my cranky opinion from the podium, I think, carries less weight than the fact that there are some real numbers about this problem. I think that particularly damning is Ithaca's 2010 study. The year after they did the faculty study, they did a study of library directors. And I think of it as the sister study to that report, because you can compare the data points between them. They asked identical questions in some places on the survey, so you can compare the results. And so check out this data. My library has a well-developed strategy to meet changing user needs and research habits. It's a pretty straightforward statement, right? Seems like something a library director, leader, dean ought to be able to say. like something that's a basic part of being a senior administrator in an organization? Or not? Good, that's the right reaction. Yeah, no, no. Call me a radical, but I don't think it's okay that 58% of surveyed library directors didn't really care one way or another about how their library was doing for planning for user needs. I think that it's pretty damn awesome that 35% of my peers said they had a well-developed plan. That's good, we like that. But I'm incredibly ashamed of and disappointed in the 65% who could not say that they had a well-developed plan for their library to meet evolving user needs. I mean, seriously, think about this. That's 65% of directors who participated in the Ithaca survey. They said they didn't have a well-developed strategy. 65%. That's 65% of our libraries. That's 65% of our professional peer institutions, the ones we look to figure out where to go next. 65% of them don't know where to go next. I could weep. So I think about this and I analyze it, and people argue with me at times when I say that this data is horrifying. We should be alarmed, we should be scared, and we should be angry. And I've gotten some arguments. And so perhaps that this is a failure of the survey, that it's a poorly phrased question that led to skewed responses. Or perhaps despite their best efforts, the pool of respondents wasn't broadly representative of trends in libraries. Or perhaps this is a moment in which our librarianly obsession with doing things perfectly, correctly, with fullness and maturity, and to absolute perfection is getting in the way of our ability to acknowledge what we have done. So maybe there has been enough well-developed strategy planning going on, but people don't feel comfortable saying that they did a good enough job. Maybe. That one's actually kind of plausible to me. But most frighteningly, I think maybe library leadership is failing 65% of the time. Anecdotes that are shared with me and people who say, can you convince my dean to do this thing? Or, I want to do this thing. How do I get my dean to let me do that thing? Or simply, can I come work for you? Indicate that it is frighteningly plausible that 65% of library leadership is failing. But in the end, I don't actually care which answer is correct. Because what I care about is moving past this. And using whatever it takes, whatever we can draw up, whatever we have, to move as much of that 65% as possible up into the strongly agree category. Because, and I say that not because I think strategic planning is awesome, and not because I think everyone should run a library the way I run a library, and not because I think we should be able to show off some rockin' survey data. I say it because none of that matters. None of that matters. But I say it because I want to have high numbers of confident strategists in our libraries because our users deserve a better future than what we're going to give them if all we do is react to a series of conflicting external priorities. So that survey data represents library directors. It was very specific. It was the highest administrator in an institution. So maybe that's just the top that is a little funky. What's the next layer down look like? So the next layer down is most easily represented by the Taiga Forum, which is composed of AULs, Associate and Assistant University Librarians, level 2 in the hierarchy. I often struggle to talk politely about Taiga. I had to rewrite this next slide more times than I care to tell you about because I couldn't say anything nice. So instead, I am going to just let Taiga's words speak for themselves. This is what Taiga says about libraries. Every few years, they put out a list of provocative statements. They call them provocative statements, saying that in the next 5 years, libraries ... and then the statements fill in that blank. These are the kinds of phrases that they use in their periodic provocative statements. The statements themselves, particularly 2006 and 2011, are pretty interesting, and I can't argue with a lot of the trends that they're identifying. But look at that language. Do you look at these and feel hopeful? Do you look at that and feel empowered to act? How about interested in change at all? Do you feel like your administrators, as represented by the Taiga AUL committee, care about what you do in any way? Or does this make you afraid for your job, fearful of what's going to happen to your values, sort of desperate about the future of our shared profession? Or does it make you feel like perhaps the things you've worked for your entire career and dreamed about have no hope, no future? Because, hey, look, they're going to cease to exist. So these are our AULs. These are our most prominent up-and-coming leaders at some of our most prominent institutions. And what they're choosing to propagate is not useful change or helpful visioning, but provocative statements that engender fear. And as any sci-fi geek will gladly tell you, fear is the mind killer. So the 2011 list is far less fear-based. I don't think any of these actually come from the 2011 list, maybe one or two. But, and it's a more realistic list, but I also think that their provocative statements from 2011 are less provocative. Check them out. When you compare them with the two previous lists, they just seem less edgy to me and more predictable, things I could have come up with, any of us could have come up with. So for me, that's the paradox and challenge of Taiga. When they're challenging our preconceptions, they do it in ways I think are counterproductive to actually changing things. But when their tone is more motivating, they don't say anything that's very interesting. So I have to ask, do we have a middle ground somewhere for library leadership? And all I can say is that there must be a middle ground for library leadership. We have to insist upon it. I don't want to be part of a field that cannot choose to act, but only react. I don't want to watch as my peers and my community get mired in the language of fear and defeat and destroy the things that we love so that we can save them. And I don't want to watch the things I value fall to the wayside. I don't want to watch smart, capable, amazing people flounder and fail because of lack of leadership. So we have to move past this pattern in which the majority of our leaders seem to see two options, to either condemn things or to fear them. We have to instead choose to act and become our best selves. Gorgeous, migrating, flying, pollinating butterflies as part of the information ecology. Not to put too fine a point on the butterfly metaphor. But so we must move past this. I've been a professional for 11 years, and in those 11 years, I've had never, ever had a clear vision of the future of libraries. None of us have. We don't know where we're going. And so it's always been blurry and cyclical and evolving and shifting. And the cyclical thing really came home for me the other day because I'm hiring a discovery metadata librarian this summer, where the search is ongoing right now. And one of the projects that we talked about for the discovery metadata librarian was to evaluate whether or not a discovery layer was a good idea for our library. That's what they hired me to do 9 years ago, except it was called federated search at the time. And so we've come right back around to where we started again. This keeps happening. Because as I said, that middle that we inhabit doesn't actually change. It's just we're changing how we're doing it. So should I have spent those 11 years with no clear future and no clear plan waiting? Should I have spent them only reacting to the problems right in front of me, never looking out into the blurry, unpredictable future? I say no. I say that we should be trying to make a plan anyway, even though we can't see where we're supposed to go, and even though we know we can't do it perfectly because we don't know all the things we need to know in order to do it. I say that we should grab onto the fact that we're flailing around and choose our path, that we see this as an opportunity, not as a chance to fail because we don't know what comes next and couldn't do it perfectly because we don't know, but as an opportunity to succeed. Because no one knows what comes next, and no one knows what perfect looks like. So how could anyone tell you you were failing? Nobody knows what's right. And so when I say we must act, I mean all of us. I mean librarians with 20 or 30 years of experience. I mean librarians with a 6-month-old degree, or those of you who aren't quite done yet. I mean frontline reference staff, I mean our instruction team, I mean our catalogers, and I also mean the coordinators of large departments in huge libraries. I mean your office neighbor, I mean your boss, I mean Tyga's AULs, and I mean you, and I mean me. We all must choose to act. Because charting our path forward isn't something that you just magically learn how to do. When you become a library administrator, they don't give you a t-shirt, a handbook, and a map. It's something we all have to figure out together by doing it. Because directors can't do it alone. Administrators can't say this is our path and then just wait for everybody to walk on it. Everyone else has to choose to take that first step. And it isn't something that we as a profession are doing particularly well right now. So I would suggest that there's a whole hell of a lot of room for new voices to begin agitating for something better. And more than just voices, actions. So that's the big, loud, here's the problem intro. So now here are 8 things that I think everyone can take a whack at and try to do towards the goal of encouraging more voices to take part in the strategy building for our libraries and future planning and thoughtful, intentional action and things that can empower you to dream and to speak and to act. So, number 1 and most important, stop defaulting to no. Start saying yes. Right as I sat down to begin writing the text that goes with the slide, I read a post on Seth Godin's blog. Seth Godin is the author of Permission Marketing, Tribes, Linchpin, a bunch of other pop marketing books. And he's as much loved by some as he is hated by others. And I find those to be the most interesting kinds of thinkers because you don't get to be loved and hated unless you're saying at least something challenging. He's the kind of person who sparks interesting conversations. So anyway, as I read his post, I thought, well, that's pretty much what I was going to say. So here it is, said by someone more famous than me. There are a million reasons to say no, but few reasons to stand up and say yes. No requires just one objection, one defensible reason to avoid change. No has many allies, anyone who fears the future or stands to benefit from the status quo. And no is easy to say because you don't actually even need a reason. No is an easy way to grab power because with yes comes responsibility, but no is an easy way to block action, to exert the privilege of your position, to slow things down. No comes from fear and greed and most of all, a shortage of openness and attention. You don't have to pay attention or do the math or role play the outcomes in order to join the coalition that would rather things stay as they are because they've chosen not to do the hard work of imagining how they might be. And yet the coalition of no keeps losing. We live in a world of yes, where possibility and innovation and the willingness to care often triumph over the masses that would rather it all just quieted down and went back to normal. Yes is the new normal. I would argue that in libraries, yes is not yet the new normal. Yes. But I would like it if yes was the new normal in libraries. And I would also temper this with a statement that you, of course, have to understand your environment. You must know when you must say no. Sometimes you must say no. Something simply is not feasible, is not appropriate, doesn't meet your mission, can't be done. But you need to know where those boundaries are and then say yes. My concrete approach to saying yes is that I just do it. I just say yes to things unless I must say no. My rubric for saying no is simple. I just consider one question. What's the worst that could happen? So seriously, next time you're posed with a challenging something and you want to say no, stop yourself for just a second and think, if we said yes, what's the worst that could happen? And then think about it. We're good at predicting the best that could happen because we like dreaming. But we're not as good at realistically assessing our fears and concerns. And I say that, and then I think, well, maybe not, because I've been in plenty of meetings at which the worst is all we can talk about. The users might do this broken thing, or they might do this other stupid thing, or they might then expect us to do this awful thing. And we talk those to death and we let them stop us. And sometimes they should, because sometimes the worst is bad. To quote a recent blog post by librarian Meredith Farkas, who writes that information wants to be free, she wrote, "Putting out something, a service, technology, etc., that risks our reputation, credibility, or relationship with our service population requires more than a let's try it and see what happens attitude." She advocates for an iterative process in library service development where you assess, and then you decide, and then you act, and then you assess, and then you decide, and then you act, over and over and over again. And so what I would add to her loop is that you should start by assessing your consequences. What's the worst that could happen? And once you've gone through all those bad, stupid, horrible, scary things that might happen, ask another question. Can you handle it? And not, will it be easy to handle it? Or do I want to handle it? Or do I have faith in my colleagues that they will handle it the way I want it handled? But can we handle it? Those are very different things. What you are capable of and what you want to do are not the same. And so once you know what the worst is, and you know whether or not you can handle it, then you're discussing what you should do, what you might do, and what is possible. And that's different than just knee-jerking to no. If you want to change the world in big or small ways, you have to sometimes take a risk and be brave. So, thing number 2, be a leader. There's already heads shaking in the audience. Stop that. A friend of mine has a sign on her door that says, "The revolution is coming." And when she was gone on a long series of business trips, some member of her team put up this sign, which says, "The revolution," which is her sign, and the little sign underneath says, "is postponed until Amy gets back, the management." So I say, never postpone the revolution because you're waiting for a hero. Be your own damn hero. You think you can't be a leader. You who are shaking your heads. You think you can't be a leader. You're in a position with no inherent power. Your dean is insane. Your coworkers are so change averse, you think that maybe they died at their desks 2 years ago and nobody noticed. You feel completely isolated and alone in the things that you believe about our future as a profession. You're just one librarian, you know? Just one person. And I do know. So am I. And I don't care about your excuses. Because if the people who have strong beliefs and passions about where we ought to be going and what we ought to be doing, and who can look at what we are doing and say, that's not good enough, if those people don't stand up and do something, you are complicit. No one in our profession is born into power. There are no silver spoons in librarianship. No one is ushered into a leadership role, at least I would say not the effective leaders. And nobody thinks this job is easy. There isn't like a magic club that you know you're a part of and then, yay, you become a leader. We all just do it anyway. I'm standing here today having had this fantastic opportunity to stand on a podium and tell you all the things I think are wrong with what we do, because I decided that I like to write. And then I decided to write fearlessly because I was tired of censoring myself. And then I decided not to listen to the haters and the cowards and the easily offended who told me I was doing it wrong. And I decided to persevere. I believe in perseverance. I have that tattooed on my back. And people started to listen to me. And so I tried harder because when people are paying attention to you, it's just fodder to keep things moving forward. And that's because I do that all, and I say all that because the thing is that fearless leaders are still afraid. They just do it anyway. It never gets easy. It never gets comfortable. It just gets normal. it just starts to feel worth it. Like the pain and the struggle and the challenge and the hard damn work are worth it. And the only way to know if you can get to a point where it feels more normal to be a leader and to step up and to say important things, the only way you will ever know if you can feel comfortable doing that is if you try. So be brave. Give it a shot. What's the worst that could happen? Switch tactics for a second, a little bit less yelling. Although this starts with yelling, because I got an email from a friend of mine who's a librarian who was really angry, and she couldn't talk to anybody in her local library because the issue was a message on a local listserv, and she just couldn't take it. And so she sent me the email, and in all caps, screeching in all caps in an email, she said, "Dear librarians, it's not okay to be clueless about copyright anymore." And the conversation that we then had is, no, you may not post to a listserv saying that since something was posted to the internet, it's public domain now, right? Librarian. And so we then started making lists of things that, no, you may not do this anymore. No, you may no longer think that it's okay that you've never looked at any book. No, it's not okay that you really don't get apps. No, it's not okay anymore that you don't understand Facebook. It's not okay that you don't get why SOPA was a big deal. It's not okay that you don't understand what all the fuss is about publishing these days. I would say it was never okay to be clueless, but it's really not okay anymore. I don't know why we ever thought it was okay, but it's not going to be okay again going out from here forward. And so I would say that, all ranting aside, if you don't understand our foundations, I don't see how you can build on them effectively. And we are all information professionals. And information is bigger than books in a library. Information is the publishing industry, and it is the changing formats, and it is copyright law, and it is all of these other things that are tendrils that come into our world because they impact on how information is produced, how it is processed, how it is disseminated, how it is accessed, and therefore how it is used in our libraries. You have to understand that framework if you want to make thoughtful, careful choices that aren't just reactions, but are actions. So I posted that, posted that screeching, "It's not okay to be clueless about copyright anymore," to my Twitter feed. I got into an argument on Twitter. 140 characters is a terrible way to have an argument. With a cataloger who works in a special library who insisted that his job is simply to catalog materials appropriately and effectively, and he doesn't need to know jack shit about copyright. I didn't agree. And I don't agree because, yeah, maybe to do the task of doing his job, he doesn't need to know anything about copyright. I was a cataloger. I know how to catalog a book. You could do that blind in the dark. It's possible. But I would say that to be a librarian, you have to know more than just how to catalog the book. And I think that that distinction matters, because the people who are going to move our profession forward, who are going to make sure that we succeed, that we achieve our goals, that we support our values, and that we get to where we want to be, are not people who are going to sit and just catalog books and never pay any attention to copyright and the pressures that it puts upon us. The people who can make smart decisions and thoughtful plans are people who understand all of the forces pushing on libraries. And so I think that having that rich contextual awareness of our atmosphere and our environment is a crucial step to being a successful, fulfilled librarian. Or you can just sit in the back room and catalog books and pay no attention to the rest of us. I suppose that's a choice, as long as you're choosing it and not just doing it by default. I would also say that we must all never forget that technology is just a tool. I get really bothered when I hear people talk about technology like it's the big bad and it's coming to hunt us down and kill everything we love. I'm equally irritated by people who seem to think that technology is going to come flying in with a cape and a magic lasso and save us all. Because technology is a thing. It's infrastructure. It's scaffolding. It's value neutral. It's a tool. And tools are only as effective as their wielders. So you can buy the best resource out there, but if you don't implement it well, it's going to suck. And the vendor's not going to want to use you as their example of best practices because you didn't understand how to use that tool effectively. The people that vendors hold up when we buy their products and they wave things around and say, hey, look at this university and look at what they did, those are the people who understand their tools. If you don't understand how to use your tools are going to not really work and possibly hurt you. Tools also don't have emotions or motivations. So you can't talk about, please never talk about how someone wants us to do it this way. Someone doesn't care how you do it. Someone doesn't have motivations or emotions. Someone doesn't think. You want to do it this way, or you don't want to do it this way but want to blame the tool. It's just a tool. It's not its fault because it doesn't have emotions or motivations. So don't ascribe more power and meaning to our tools than they actually have. It's a dangerous path. I would also say that it's important to acknowledge that tools cannot fix people. We just rewrote the bylaws in my library, and they're now a third as long as they were when we started. And I had nothing to do with it. The director does not write the bylaws, but I'm so proud because the bylaws as previously written spent a lot of time trying to dictate how people should behave to each other. They tried to create a structure in which people would no longer have a communication problem by mandating behavior. You know what happens when you try to mandate behavior? Nothing. Nothing happens. So if you have a communication problem in your library and you're trying to fix it with your bylaws, I'd tell you it's really just not going to work. And if you have a communication problem in your library and you try to fix it by implementing some technology tool, of which there are many of which are awesome, it's not going to fix your problem either. It may be that if you put into place something like Basecamp, which is a very cool project management, collaborative project management tool, if you put Basecamp in place, there will be a couple people whose communication problems will be solved because they'll like the tool and they will attach themselves to the tool because they take to it naturally and it really fits into the way that they work and wow, they're suddenly communicating with the people that they could never be bothered to send an email to. But it didn't fix them. They're still the same person with the same habits and patterns and behaviors. And it's not going to magically fix everybody because people are still people. Tools can't fix people. People can fix tools. Remember where the agency is in this. And just a reminder, to quote one of my favorite Ani DeFranco songs, every tool is a weapon if you hold it right. So choose your tools wisely and think carefully about how you wield them. They are only as effective as you are in using them. They don't have motivations, only you do, and they can't fix anybody, but they can be really, really effective if you use them appropriately. And all of this, I think, comes back to what I was saying in the beginning, which is that we need to not be reacting, but acting. We need to not react to exactly whatever it is that the tool tells us about, whatever technology is coming at us, whatever the default settings are about anything. Don't react. Act. Make choices. Be informed, and choose your path. We also need to rethink strategic planning. This is a big one. And my favorite thing right now about strategic planning is a TED Talk from TEDx Tucson by a woman named Hildy Gottlieb. And she talks about, and I'm going to really sort of very briefly move through what is 20 minutes of a very good talk. And I would really recommend you go out and listen to the whole thing if you have a chance. But I'm going to hit some high points, and I won't do it as well as she does. So again, please go listen to it. And she talks about the fact that she and her partner were working with community groups about strategic planning. That this is what they do, is strategic planning for community groups who want to change the world in some way. And she watched and saw that people are working harder and harder, but things aren't actually getting any better. And she said that when they took a look at the plans that people had that were so very meant and felt, but weren't getting any traction, they learned some really interesting things about the way that people were attempting to do strategic planning. One of her observations is that if you really even just look at the word, strategy comes from strategos, which originally meant high-ranking military official. Strategic planning is great for winning short-term battles, but not so much for changing the world. And they were looking at these plans and thinking about change, and based on all of their experiences, change was something that was hard and happened slowly. But when you looked at people who were really talking about the things they wanted to see in the world and the things that they truly valued and hoped for, there was a lot of grace and joy in that. And so the question was, where did that get lost? Why did strategic planning and change become hard and heavy? And so she says, one of the things she says is that when we talk about change, we most often talk about what we don't want, not what we do. And makes the point that I think is incredibly powerful, which is that if you eliminate something negative, if your strategic plan and your goal and your conversation about change is to get rid of a bad thing, you have gone from -1 to 0. But you didn't really go anywhere. That is not, going to 0 is not yearning for the possible and the hopeful and the future. Going to 0 is just fixing a problem. And strategic planning should not be just fixing a problem. So one of the questions then is, so how do we do it differently? I mean, if this is what we all seem to be doing by and large, what do we do? How do we make it different? How do we make it better? And she says we all actually know exactly how to do this. We just never seem to apply it to organizational planning. And the example she used is an airplane flight. So I'm flying home at 10:30 tonight. And so if I'm flying home at 10:30 tonight, I'm going to do what I suspect most of the people in this room would do, which is to say, okay, my plane's leaving at 10:30, which means it's boarding at 10, which means I need to be at the airport by 9, and then I need to find out how long it takes to get there from here by cab, and I need to find out if they're gonna have to call me a cab or if there's a cab out front, and you just start tacking things on, starting from your goal and tacking things backward until you get to right now. This is how we move through our days in intentional ways and get places on time. This is not how we do strategic planning. By and large, we do strategic planning by standing around and saying, okay, where are we? And we study the hell out of now. We look at everything that's going on in our libraries, and we look at everything that's going on in the industry, and we look at everything that's going on at our university, and we look at everything we can learn about 18 to 22-year-olds. And then we say, what do we do? Because we didn't think about where we wanted to go and where we were hoping to end up. We're making plans tethered to the now. That's what Gottlieb says, that our strategic planning is always tethered to the now. And it really ought to be tethered to the goal. And so she simply advocates that we do, in our organizations and in our strategic planning, the thing we do naturally in the rest of our lives. That we stop treating this like some sort of abnormal process that must be completed and is torturous. That we simply look at planning for our profession and our future and our institutions the way we plan for everything else in our lives. So I say, examine your timidity. We are a timid profession. I don't know what happened there. But you know, some of the things I've said are really just not that shocking, and the amount of blowback I get about how you could possibly say that is remarkable. So in the past year, I've publicly griped about the American Chemical Society, about Elsevier, about bad information policy legislation, about bad library leadership, specifically at McMaster in Canada. And Some people have warned me off. Lots of people have warned me off, saying that I should consider my actions before committing such a political act. And I say, pointing out the truth is not a political act, or a wrong one. But as a profession, we seem to think it is. We seem to think that saying true things in public, if they aren't 100% complimentary, is a major sin. And I don't know why. 100 other librarians could be talking about these things. And in fact, when I talk about them, I get more people saying I agree with you than I get saying, oh my God, shut up. But the people who agree with me aren't doing it publicly. And so I know that we all could be talking, and I know that we are all capable of talking. I also know that there are people in positions that make it impossible for them to talk because of the consequences of using their voice in their current environment. To which I also say there is such a thing as an anonymity on the internet. It is possible. And so what I would ask is that each and every one of you look at, question, and affirm your decisions about why you choose to be timid, about why you choose to be silent. I know that not everyone's answer is going to end up with them standing on a stage in front of 200 people and saying bold things, but I just ask that everyone understand why they have made the choices that they've made, and that they are choices and not just reactions. There was an Inside Higher Education essay that I read last week that I think says some interesting things about organizational change. He says that there are 5 things that must be in play in order for an organization to change. We all must have the ability to change, the actual ability to make something be different. But we also must have a belief in the ability to make that change. We have to not only be capable of it, but believe that we are capable of it. And then you have to have number 3, which is a desire to change. If you don't actually desire to change, you can't do it. And then you have to have number 4, which is the desire to appear to change. Sometimes we don't want people to think that we're changing things, and so that adds another layer onto it. And his 5th is the courage to translate ideas into action. Even if you have all of the first 4, if you don't have the courage to do it, they're not worth much. And so I think that all of those apply in some way to the way that librarians move through the world and how we choose to speak. We are seemingly very afeared of rocking the boat, and I have to ask why. Which of those aversions to change is really the one that is in play? Why is telling the truth now a political act in our profession? Where is our courage in action? And so I would simply say that we have to acknowledge that we seem to have a culture of silence, and that what results is mouse-like, timid creatures instead of the brave and bold professionals that I think we could be. And so hand in hand with that, I say we also have to acknowledge our fears. There's another TED Talk. Peter Bregman, he writes for Harvard Business Review blogs, and he did a TED Talk, TEDx Flint. And he says in that we learn by falling face first into the unknown and then exploring our surroundings when we get there. He uses the example of his daughters when he's giving this talk. And he talks about the fact that children, developmentally speaking, children learn by doing things they've never done before, failing, and trying again. This is just how learning happens in our world. But when we get to be adults, we know the falling is coming. It's like taking a 3-year-old downhill skiing. They don't have poles, and they fly down those hills because they have no sense of consequences. You put a grown-up who's never skied before on downhill skis at the top of a hill, they just stand there. Because we know the fall is coming, and we're trying not to fall, and we're farther from the ground than we were when we were 3. So we try not to. And you know what happens then? You don't learn. So if you want to learn, you have to deal with the uncomfortable emotions that go along with knowing that you might fail when you try something new. And you have to choose, because Bregman says we can either remain very comfortable or we can reach our full potential. You can't have both, because to reach your full potential, you have to learn. And in order to learn, you have to deal with the uncomfortable feelings that go along with learning. He raises another point about institutions and learning. And he says that one of the things that he does as a consultant when talking about institutional change is he goes into an organization and says to everyone that he's meeting with, what are the undiscussables in this organization? What are we too resistant to? What are we afraid to talk about? What are we hesitant to discuss with each other? What are the things we will gladly ignore for another decade if you let us? And then he says, discuss them. Confront the undiscussables, because those are things about which we have fear. And if they are things about which we have fear, they are very probably things about which we might have a great learning experience if we pushed through the uncomfortable emotions that go along with discussing them. He also advocates for knowing your own tell, which I think is a piece of brilliant advice. He talks about how when he is getting information or feedback that he is uncomfortable with, he gets physically hot, he starts invalidating the person who's talking to him, and he wants to go check his email. We all have these. The moment when you know that you don't want to deal with whatever's being handed to you, you have a reaction. And whatever that reaction is, know it, learn it, understand it about yourself. Because if you know what it is, you can subvert it. You can recognize that moment when you're about to check out and go check your email. And then you can choose whether or not you honor it and go check your email, or whether you choose to stay and have this conversation because it matters to you, even though everything in your subconscious psyche is saying, get me out of here. He also tells an anecdote about a woman and her grandson, and the little boy is staring at a big flight of stairs, and she asks him what's wrong, and he says, I don't like the steps. And she replies, you don't have to like the steps, you just have to climb them. And so that's our life as humans in this world. We don't have to like the steps, we just have to climb them, even if we're afraid of them, even if they make us uncomfortable. Fear is just a piece of what we do, and we have to integrate it into our daily functioning. In a blog post at the Harvard Business Review that I saw at the same time that I saw this TED Talk, he has another take on fear as related to starting a new project, to starting a big project that you're procrastinating on. And I think that this is smart too, so let me read you a piece of it. He says, resist the temptation to minimize your anxiety. That's a false macho response and it lacks courage. It's also counterproductive. It gives power to the fear, almost guaranteeing that it'll haunt you and prevent your progress. Here's why acknowledging your fear works. You're scared because you expect a lot from yourself and you're afraid you'll underperform. When you acknowledge that fear, you're acknowledging that you might not have all that it takes to meet your expectations. You might not have all the tools, information, skills, etc. Admitting that, in turn, reduces your expectation of getting it perfect right off the bat. And lowering your expectation of getting it right is the key to getting it started. And I think that that's something that applies to a lot of what I've seen happening in our professional world. That if we can't do it perfectly, we don't want to do it at all because we're afraid of the consequences of not doing it perfectly. And it's a big cycle that just keeps us locked in an immovable position where nothing happens. I think that's bad. So I think that these two ideas of his play nicely together and play well with Hildy Gottlieb's commentary on strategic planning. We have to explore our fears if we want to move past them and if we want to learn. So we're comfortable right here in the now, many of us, where we like how things were and how things are, and we spent a lot of time examining our present. But if we want to move forward, we're going to have to acknowledge our fear, start tethering ourselves to the things that we want, and just climb the damn steps. And so that brings me to my last one, because I don't want to end with yelling at people. I don't think that's fair. In which I say that I often, when I'm talking to friends who are going through a rough patch, who are having problems, I often say things that follow the pattern of chase joy, chase hope. But I don't think that it's fair to tell an audience of professionals that they should chase joy or chase hope, because I don't think that it's fair to insist that you be joyful and hopeful about your professional world. But what I do think is fair is to say chase inspiration, because inspiration has a place in anyone's job, in anyone's world. And it's not out of character to say that about our work. And so I am going to share a short list of things that inspire me, just to give you a sense of what it is that I'm talking about when I say chase inspiration. And so, our students inspire me. if you are in a position where you don't have a chance to interact with your student body, change that somehow. Even if that's go have lunch in their cafeteria, or go see a student play, or go hang out where they hang out just for half an hour to watch them move through the world. If you have a place where you can actually interact with them and talk to them, please do that, because they are a remarkable bunch of young people. Some of them are kind of crazy, and we have some serious entitlement issues going on in our 18 to 22-year-old population right now. But by and large, they are doing remarkable things, and they are remarkable people, and they are why we do this. So go out there and talk with them. You may have noticed, I'm a fan of TED Talks. The thing I like about TED Talks is very specific, is that they are always less than 20 minutes long. That means I can fit them in on my lunch hour. And they are quite simply, by definition, a bunch of really smart, engaged people talking about things that inspire them. How could that not be awesome? And TED makes sure that they're not just sort of businessy crap stuff, which is where I tend to go to because it's who I am. There are also comedians and artists and scientists, and they do remarkable, remarkable things. If TED Talks aren't something that you've ever spent any time with and you find their website a bit intimidating, if you are also a Netflix user, Netflix has started curating TED Talks by topic, which is fantastic. And they are available for streaming, and I think they might actually be printing them on discs. So it's an easy way to enter, but really 5 to 20 minute pieces of presentation from people who love what they do and want to share it. Super cool. But if the businessy crap really is your corner of the world, then I would suggest the Harvard Business Review blogs. The blogs don't have the same barriers to access that the Harvard Business Review has, and includes some interesting thoughts from interesting people. And so take a look. I almost always either find something that I think, ooh, I could do that better, or think, hey, look, I'm doing that. That's good. Other people think it's a good idea. And so they're just a place that I go to get some affirmation and inspiration about where to go next with the issues in front of me. I hope, for all of your sakes, that you have what you consider a librarian brain trust. Other people might call it a professional network, but I think that's boring. So I think of it as my brain trust because it really is the group of people that I go to when I need help, I need affirmation, I need to scream really loud about the thing that's irritating me today that I cannot do in my office. In large part, these are people who are not at my institution, not because I don't love my colleagues, but because we all need some sort of external inspiration about our jobs. The people who are stuck in the same quagmire you are stuck in cannot inspire you about your job. Other people can. Other people can say, yeah, but I know that that's driving you crazy, but you love this, and look how often you get to do that. And that kind of feedback mechanism is absolutely invaluable to keeping us moving in the day-to-day. I'm also very fond of Dana Boyd. Dana Boyd is a researcher for Microsoft who works on social media. And my librarian brain trust actually despise her because they feel like she writes things that are completely common sense, that everybody should already know this, and she's getting all this credit for being a scholar for talking about things that are totally common sense. And that one of my friends says she studies teenagers like they're, animals in a zoo. To which I respond, sure, that's all true, but the people that I need to convince about the things that me and my library brain trust think are common sense value academic study. Senior administrators don't care how many articles I pull off the internet about the prevalence of social media, but they will listen to a white paper written by a Microsoft-funded scholar talking in academic terms about teenagers like they are animals in a zoo and saying things that I consider are common sense. She is an authority. And so if you need to make an argument from authority about things which are common sense, social media, living internet information things, she's a fantastic resource. She may irritate some of you personally, so that's okay. It's a tool. All right, we done? Okay. It's how she goes, it's what she calls herself. So Amanda Palmer and Neil Gaiman. Now, on the one hand, they are both simply artists who make art that I admire and enjoy. But on another hand, Amanda Palmer has built an indie music career out of her social media connections. And she's a musician, she's a singer, she's a pianist, she plays the ukulele. She's a performance artist, and when she makes music, puts it up on her website for download for free, with a button that says, "Pay me whatever you think it's worth." And she makes a living. She also makes a living out of touring obsessively and compulsively and doing surprise shows where fans can show up at a park and she'll play for an hour. And she publicizes all of those on Twitter. And she has built this whole career out of disrupting the information distribution cycle for music. And it's working. She happens to be married to Neil Gaiman, who is an author that I have been reading for years and years, who is a part of the traditional publishing ecosystem. He started in comic books, which is not mainstream necessarily, but it is a very traditional publishing medium. Moved into novels and writing television scripts and movies, and so he is very engaged in that which is the old way. But he also actively engages with his fan base online and plays with new things. He has had a blog for almost a decade now, I guess, and he now has recently, in the last couple months, discovered Tumblr. And so he is always exploring how he can connect with the world and what he can use and what he can talk about and what he can play with. And I think that both of them, the ways that they interact with art, distribution, and the media and the community parts of our world are very, very interesting and worth paying attention to. Another of my favorites is Rachel Maddow. You don't have to care about my politics, but what I like about her presentation is that she manages to be completely truthful, bluntly honest, and never, ever cruel. She is straightforward and sometimes incredibly funny, but not at the expense of the people that she is talking about. Only their actions, only their words, never their personalities. And I think that ability to speak the truth in a way that is not a personal attack is incredibly valuable. And so I watch sometimes not just because I believe in her politics, but because I want to watch her presentation. And I also love watching online communities form. I think there's something incredibly interesting about the dynamics of people and the internet. I spent a lot of time on a social media site called FriendFeed, which is not something that ever really took off in the big way that some others have, but it's where a bunch of my friends are, so it's where I go. And it has the ability to create little special interest groups. The most recent one that I joined is the Fitbit fans group, because I wear a Fitbit, which is a little pedometer biometric tracker, and so we're all talking about our Fitbits. It's a bunch of people that I have nothing in common with except for the Fitbit, and really interesting conversations happen, and these little communities form up in no time flat. And I think that is completely entertaining to watch happen. I love it. And it tells us things about the way that we interact with each other and with ourselves, and the way we present ourselves online, and the way that information is shared online. And I gain a lot from paying attention to these things. So that's my list of things that inspire me. And I'm not saying that you should be inspired by the same kinds of things, but I hope that it sparks some thought in your mind about the things that you can do to stay engaged with our world, with the information ecostructure, with anything that matters to you. And so these were my 8 things. Say yes, be a leader, start paying attention, never forget technology is just a tool, rethink strategic planning, examine your timidity, acknowledge your fear, and chase inspiration. And so what happens if you do that, right? Isn't that the question? Where am I going with this? I would say something remarkable happens if you do that. I would say that people who have chosen to embrace the kind of thing that I am talking about are the kinds of people who end up creating life-changing worlds modifying technology like the iPad. And I would also say that if you have ever looked at a 3-year-old with a tablet computer, you know something remarkable is about to happen in this world. I was at a conference last summer, and somebody important from PBS was one of the speakers. He was working for PBS's educational arm, and he was talking about PBS Kids, and I don't remember his name, so I'm sorry. But he was good, and he talked about the things that they've done with PBS Kids to move their television programming into the online environment, and the astronomical numbers that they got on click-throughs once they launched the online stuff, because any of you with children or exposure to children know that toddlers through sort of age 6 are obsessed with repetition, and so the ability to play the same clip of the PBS show that they love over and over and over again, their click-throughs are through the roof. They like blew up servers. They had no idea how quickly it was gonna take off. The thing that's useful and important about that is that the things that PBS does on PBS Kids are all learning objects. Everything they program is a learning object. Intentionally, they actually have formalized early childhood literacy programs going on in libraries around the country linked to PBS Kids content. They have educational specialists and instructional designers building it. And so we have a generation of kids who are coming up right now who have been taught to learn using online and visual learning objects, who have access to tablet computing. Something remarkable is going to happen in the next 10 or 15 years when all of that comes to fruition and these kids are adults. I don't know what it is. Nobody does. We don't know where the future's going. But something remarkable is going to happen. And I think that there are ways that we can position libraries and librarianship to be a part of that, but only if we're paying attention and only if we're making choices about how we act. Because when these kids hit college, are we going to be ready? Not if we're reacting, only if we choose to act. And so I say, if you're unconvinced, please consider SOPA and PIPA and the Research Works Act. This year, we saw 3 pieces of legislation that made my skin crawl. These 3 things, SOPA and PIPA would have given unprecedented power to the government to shut down websites for copyright infringing behavior on the part of users. And the Research Works Act would have outlawed open access mandates coming out of the government. None of them are in the best interests of access to information and freedom of research, and all 3 were defeated this year, and all 3 will be back. So where did they come from and why will they be back? They came from the old guard information industries, the MPAA, the RIAA, Elsevier. They came from monolithic segments of our information economy, places where people and corporations that have had control over production, distribution, and the financials of their corner of the industry. And then the internet came along and it changed everything. And user expectations and behaviors changed. And the corporate stakeholders said, but we're caterpillars, and they should stop sprouting wings. Let's cut off their wings. Cutting off the wings, censoring websites, forcing taxpayers to pay for things they already funded. This isn't going to stuff the wings back inside the caterpillar. The world turned into a butterfly, and it's just unstoppable at this point. The mass protests and backlash from the new information economy made that clear. There are new economic drivers in play here, and there are new user expectations. Pretty much no one thinks we're going back to the days of Blockbuster and Borders, print newspapers, record stores. We've moved on. Netflix, Amazon, Google News, iTunes. And SOPA, PIPA, and the RWA are all reactions to the fact that all of these things changed and the industry wasn't ready for it. And they reacted. And they reacted out of fear and protectionism and ignorance and misplaced arrogance. And they're going to continue to wave that power around. But I'd say the avalanche has already begun, and forget the pebbles. The boulders don't even get to vote anymore. So my point, as I suspect you can see, is that if we want to do something remarkable with libraries, information literacy, access to information, preservation and digitization going into our future, all that potential that we see out there, we have to act. not react. We do not want to model ourselves after the dying archetypes of the information industry. It is not the model we want to follow. They're simply providing us with bad examples of what happens when the fearful try to replicate the past and control the future. So instead, I say get inspired. Think of the kid with the iPad, not of the way things used to be. Be something more interesting than SOPA and PIPA and the Research Works Act. Think farther. Think further, and then acknowledge your fears of doing those things and move past them. Do something. Since April is Poetry Month, let me close with 2 short bits of poetry. The first is the middle piece of a poem by Neil Gaiman called Instructions, which I offer up to you because I think sometimes the fairy tales were right and that their lessons are still important. If an eagle gives you a feather, keep it safe. Remember that giants sleep too soundly, that witches are often betrayed by their appetites. Dragons have one soft spot somewhere, always. Hearts can be well hidden, and you betray them with your tongue. Do not be jealous of your sister. Know that diamonds and roses are as uncomfortable when they tumble from one's lips as toads and frogs, colder too, and sharper, and they cut. Remember your name. Do not lose hope. What you seek will be found. Trust ghosts. Trust those that you have helped to help you in their turn. Trust dreams. Trust your heart, and trust your story. And finally, my favorite Shel Silverstein poem. Listen to the mustn'ts, child. Listen to the don'ts. Listen to the shouldn'ts, the impossibles, the won'ts. Listen to the never haves, and then listen close to me. Anything can happen, child. Anything can be. And so I say, trust yourself and go be anything that we can dream of. Thank you. In my experience, people often don't have questions. I usually get sort of stunned stares.
I'll ask one. I'd put myself in the camp of the people who agree with you. But I am curious, great talk. I would like to know, since you are the director of your institution, how you're applying some of your philosophy on the micro level. What have you done locally to affect the type of changes you're talking about?
The most important thing that I could say that I do locally is the say yes thing. I am still 3 years in trying to truly and honestly convince the library staff that I mean it when I say, come ask me, and if I can say yes, I will. I told the story last night that we started a new technology help desk service to answer the why can't I print and how do I get my laptop on the network questions, and to drag that off of the reference desk so the reference librarians can focus on research instruction. And when we put that in place, the staff member who suggested it asked for a giant iMac. And I said, yes, if that's what he thinks is appropriate to do the job, and I can afford it, yeah, sure. And we put it out there. And within days, one of the reference librarians had come to me and said, why did Jim get a big computer? And I said, because he asked. And so we're slowly building an internal culture where you make a plan, it's a smart plan, it's based on what we need to do, and I will say yes. And I hope that that's trickling down and that they're learning to say yes, that the library staff are learning to say yes to each other because I'm modeling what can happen when you say yes from the top. There's a bunch of other little things, but I'll be around if you'd like to talk. I did.
Okay, so we can comment. Is that correct?
Yes, I could find that post and link it up to the top. It's out there. It was probably late June, early July, because I was irritated. So I would have done it promptly upon returning to Potsdam.
It's just a comment anyway.
Yes, certainly.
I agree with that, about 98% of what you said, but I wonder about whether we can really consider technologies as being value neutral. There's all sorts of value built into savings from like some that there's like an article or so when you're considering technologies, it's true, you're supposed to control them, but even something as simple as Google search, there's all sorts of value. Do you consider that when you're thinking about technology's value?
I'll repeat the question, but yeah, I don't think the floor mics are actually on. The question is that, can I honestly say the technology is value neutral? Because things like Summon and the way that Google search work, they have things built into them that direct processes. And that therefore they are creating a path which may in fact have values inherent in it. And I guess my answer is I don't know.
Yeah.
Because part of my challenge is that I want to say that it really just is a tool, and how you choose to use it, when you choose to use it, where you choose to use it, is what brings those choices about the tool to the forefront. When we were talking about federated search 8 years ago, we talked about how we didn't want to put it out. We wanted to do it just for the subject areas, and so then it would only be used by essentially skilled researchers, because the people who got to the biology research page would be the upper division students who then would be, and so we were trying to direct who had access to it. And so I think that there are choices that you can make that either choose to acknowledge or not the things that are built into the software. But yeah, Google does have a certain value system behind it that is inherent in the way that it searches for things and directs people to use stuff. But I think that the more important thing is the choices that we make around that. So yes, my argument is not as nuanced as it should be, but still, I think that the value of it lies with making a choice about how we're going to use something and when, by assessing the tool as a tool, and seeing and looking at what it can and cannot do and how.
Thank you.
Certainly. Well, thank you all very much. I appreciated the opportunity.